evening, everybody. This is DrHack. And just like Captain Nemo, guys, we got to go deeper into this King's Indian stuff. So let's do this. Now we're gonna quickly revisit something that we saw last time and just go a smidge further into it. Okay, and the last time we saw this idea that maybe white can put 3 pawns into the middle, and we decided that we should hold those pawns back with our d6 pawn. Okay, great. Now what I want to explore with you guys is this very ultra aggressive idea that white might have to try to attack your king side, right? And if you notice this square in particular, you've got 2 pieces aimed at it. And so in order for white to stick a pawn through that square to g5, g5, he'll have to do something to aim something else at the square. So if he plays the move f3, or if he plays the move h3, or if he plays the move bishop to e2, all of those things seem to help him get a handle on this square exactly. And now I'm going to open the database for you, and we're going to look at what the masters do most of the time in this opening. Most of the time, 39%, they put the knight out, but every other move, 22%, they attack g4, 20%, they attack g4, 7% more, they attack g4. So this is much more common of an idea to attack this square than it is to just completely develop your knight and keep going as white. Right? So we'd better get a pretty good handle on that just to make sure we understand. Okay, now I'm going to close this up for a second here. You see that our move is castles. We're going to play that. Because I want to know what happens. I want to know if you guys know what to do if they start attacking the wing of the board. And this is not a trick question. This is something you have a wealth of knowledge about from your previous openings 2 times now. Take a minute. This is black to move. Okay. So in the Roy Lopez, when they attacked on the wing of the board, our most principled counterattack was to go through the middle to get to him. It's no different here, guys. In the Caro-Kann, we didn't have the ability to go through the middle when they attacked on the wing, so we had to attack on the opposite wing. We have those options here too. But take a quick look at his king and try to decide with me which place on the board is going to be the safest for him. Well, if these pawns are still here, he's safest kind of anywhere, right? He could stay right smack in the middle and nothing would come and get him. But let's say that these pawns were missing and he can't stay in the middle. Is he going to go king side or is he going to go queen side? What do you think? Now, as he plays this move, and I suspect more pawns are coming, right? I'm going to suppose that he's not going to castle that way. That's my first guess. Now, we don't know what our opponents are going to do until they do it, guys. So we have to give him credit for the possibility that he's going to do something crazy. But I think maybe his king will be safest on the queen side of the board. And that means that as we break through the middle, we need to keep that thought in mind that his king may end up over here at some point, and we should probably leave this bishop as kind of our rock star attacker on his king on that side of the board. Which means if we were to play the move pawn to e5 now, after they've started this kingside action, maybe that's not helping us any, right? Maybe the bishop is just blocked in. And that means we should probably start with the other pawn, because that will open the bishop's attack on this side of the board as we try to open the center. Now let's see what the masters are doing. Right? They're all playing c5. They understand what we just talked about. And the computer, it also understands what we're talking about. It wants to play c5. Okay, so let's say now that we do play c5. And we have to imagine that our opponent, being the attacky player that he is not going to trade queens. This would be kind of a little bit foolish of him to start an attack on the king side, but then remove his best attacker of that side of the board. Okay, so we're going to assume that he's not going to do that, and we're also going to assume that he's not going to open the middle of the board of his own free will. We're going to have to force that to happen. And so most of the time we're going to expect that this pawn will stay put or move forward. Now I just want you to demonstrate to yourselves how much you know here. We're trying to make an attack. The most powerful one comes through the middle of the board. How do we do it? This is black to move. Okay. And if you said we've got to remove these pawns and you're looking at trying to make a B pawn move, that square is covered a whole bunch, right? That's going to be very difficult to make this square work. But this one, We have control of that one right now, and we can start to break through the middle with the e-pawn moving. Let's check and see what the masters do. Oh, they all play e6, 83% of them. Let's see what the computer likes. Oh, it likes to break open through the middle too. Okay, right? And so we see that our normal principles of attack through the middle of the board are starting to work. And assuming white were to take this, which I don't think he should do, this would make our life so much easier, because now we can even take our knight, and remember what makes it more powerful, right, is to move it inside of this square as far up the board as we can go and plant it there. Well, now there's a perfect square for him right here. Way up in that box. That's got to be worth more than a bishop at least, right? And so we know how to play this game now. We know how to make our pieces better. We know how to come through the middle to get his king. We can even step across and start pressuring through the middle to his king in a minute. Or find a different idea. There are many here, many, many good ones. Okay, so I just wanted to demonstrate for you guys how much you do know about this already. Now let's get into the new stuff. So we're going to take a minute now, and we're going to learn how to beat the London system using the King's Indian. Because remember, we said when we're playing the King's Indian, our opponents can have whatever idea they'd like to have. Well, this is absolutely one of those ideas, isn't it? This one's even kind of popular, so here we go. Now, characterize this player that you're playing for a minute, yeah? They're playing a systematic opening where the moves that they play are almost always the same all the way up until move 7 or 8. They're going to play this move and that move, right? And they're going to bring the knight out, and they're going to bring the bishop to one of these two squares. And they're going to do all of that before they look up and notice that you're even sitting there. Okay? Now, we could potentially take advantage of that, because we're playing kind of a systematic opening too, but our system just ended. All we wanted to do was set up a King's Indian with the bishop on g7. That only took us 3 moves. So our opponent has several more moves before he is ready. All right? And so what can we do in that amount of time to really give him a headache? And I think there are exactly 2 things that we can do. Okay? And one of them is realizing, first of all, that this knight is probably at his max value for this game. Now that's maybe difficult to understand unless you saw the video, the first one, the feng shui of the King's Indian. And we would know then that this knight, in order to get better, would have to move forward and plant himself somewhere on white's side of the board and be able to stay there. Now, anywhere our knight can plant himself will be under attack by a lot of white pieces. Okay, and if he plants himself on d5, there may be a pawn that removes him pretty soon. Okay, so this knight is unlikely to get better on his own. So what we can do is we can seek to trade him for this bishop. And since he's going to be worth 3 and the bishop's always going to be worth 3, that is a pretty good trade for us. Okay, so we're looking at moves like knight to h5, and we're trying to make it work. Now, it doesn't quite work here, does it? Because his bishop could just move this way. And that gives him the opportunity to trade for our bishop, unless we want to make a really wonky pawn move, which we don't want to do. Okay. So in order to make that knight move, we've got to put a pawn at d6 first. Well, that's great. We kind of wanted to do that anyways, right? And now we really are threatening to put a knight here and take his bishop off the board for our knight. So they should do something about it. Now, if he's London systeming and he's not looking at what you're doing, he may just do something like this and you get it. That's great for you. But if they do notice, and they play the move like this, now if you were to throw your knight out there, the bishop could hide. So we're not going to do that anymore. And that's when we switch gears to our secondary idea on how to beat this one. And that is, we kind of look up the board and we look for the weak spots and we go, where are they? Well, there's one here. Remember that the space the bishop left behind when it moved, it was guarding b2, and now it's no longer guarding b2. So we have the ability to attack that square, maybe. But we definitely have to put c5 into our book of ideas then, right? Maybe we want a castle first because of all these checks coming down this diagonal. I would. And it just depends on what he does next, right? But I think c5 has to happen because that's the way that we set up the rest of our strategy. And the rest of our strategy happens with how these 2 pawns interact. So let's take all the pieces off the board and let's understand that. Okay, so let's look at all the versions of these two pawns trading. Okay, so let's look, first of all, let's start with taking it. And let's actually just take it back with a piece for white. Let's say a knight comes in and grabs that thing off the board. Let's remove it. This is, believe it or not, something that you have seen before. Because all the openings that we're learning, the Roy Lopez, the Caro-Kann, right, now the King's Indian, they're all part of a package as a whole with the ideas that kind of interact, they intertwine, they're all the same. And so when you see this is actually our Caro-Kann. Now it looks weird. I'm gonna flip the colors and turn it upside down. And now all of a sudden it should look more familiar to you. Because when we play our Caro-Kann, this is the pawn structure that we have. And remember, our ideas were to play these pawns forward and try to break down white's space. Well, we're on the opposite side of that in this one. It's now white's job to play the pawns forward and break down our space. But we know what's coming. We know what's up. And in order to win this one in the Caro-Kann, you could always go back and rewatch that video. Our ideas might be to play to the C file and push this B pawn up. Or it could be just to use the rook here and push this pawn up until we trade off and have an attack on the king side of the board. You get to choose which one you like the best. You could even go straight through the middle if they were very passive and they weren't trying to do this at all. Okay, so we kind of get that one because we've already seen this before. So I'm gonna bypass this one, and I'm gonna give you guys the homework that if you haven't done the Caro-Kann work yet, go back and do that now. Right? Take the time. We did a long series of 7 videos. It's a little bit over an hour of stuff. Not that bad. Okay, so let's go back to this and let's see another way that this could interact. Right? If we take this and he captures it back with this pawn. This is also something you guys already know from the Caro-Kann. And it'll look a lot more, familiar if I push this pawn forward. Do we remember the tier 1 attacker? And the tier 1 attacker, the queen and the bishop coming in along this diagonal to attack your king? And in the Caro-Kann, we played this one to slow that attack on down, didn't we? And our goal now is to take this bishop back here and trade it for that one. Is all this coming back to you guys? If it's not, then that Caro-Kann, again, these ideas are so intermeshed and intertwined that we need to go back and we need to see it again maybe. Okay? Now I'm going to do the one that is unique to the King's Indian now. This is something that we haven't had before, and so we're going to spend the most amount of time here. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to make sure we understand that these pawns are all in symmetry, meaning that there is always a pawn across from another pawn. And if we were to lock these pawns in the middle like this, we'd come upon a situation where if anybody changes the pawn structure, they're going to take a disadvantage in the new pawn structure. That means that if white were to play this pawn forward, for example, and these two were to trade, we would take it and he would take that back with a piece. What does that leave? Now, I should probably take that off the board so we're not distracted. Bear with me here. That leaves a bad pawn for white for the duration of the game that black can then attack, right? So the guy that changes the pawn structure takes a disadvantage in the new pawn structure when there is symmetry, when there's a pawn across from every other pawn. There's no way to make a pawn trade that doesn't do that, okay? And so what we have to do in this one is we have to just use our pieces only. We have to make our pieces superior to theirs in some way. Luckily, we know that that's the driving strategy behind the King's Indian because we did a video about the feng shui of the King's Indian where we talked about how our pieces can get better than our opponents and what they can do well, right? And so we just need to go back and understand that at a very deep level. How do your knights really get better in this one? How do your rooks get better? What do your bishops need to do? Right? They have to have targets and move around their own pawns. Well, that's what we're up to in this one. Okay? We have to make our pieces better than theirs. And so we kind of know all the different ways that the pawns can interact already, except for that one. Right? So let's look at it for a minute with the pieces back on the board. It's white's turn here. And I think our kind of cue to take this pawn happens as soon as the knight can no longer come to c3. Like, for example, if he were to play this move, I think that would be our cue. We could go ahead and take this pawn if we wanted to. Because if he decides to keep it in the realm of King's Indian, right? And not go into the Caro-Kann type stuff by taking it that way. Then now we have this idea that we should get piece superiority, and his knight kind of went to a worse square. That's pretty okay for us, right? And so now we just need to figure out how to make our pieces better than his exactly on these 3 files of the board. And that's what we're staring at, right? And I want to leave you today with one last idea on how to make this knight better than your opponent's knights in this kind of a game. And I want you to stare with me for a minute exactly at this square. Because remember, if we moved our knight to the 3rd row, that's pretty good. That's worth 3 points. But the knight gets better as he moves forward in that square. I keep alluding to that, but it's so true. How could we make that knight end up here instead of on c6, right? He would have to go through this track to get there. But we'd also have to remove the d pawn. And that means that we might want to try moves like rook to e8 and pushing this pawn up to here after the knights come to d7, right, to defend it. And by doing that, we might be able to remove white's pawn from that square, and our knight might be able to become a very nice piece sitting there, backed up by another pawn, right, and maybe even anchored in with the pawn at a5, keeping his pawns from chasing our knight away. So if you could stare at this square long enough to find a way to get the knight there, you might find a way that to make this idea work. And then you'd have a lot further to go into your opening with strong ideas. Boy, I sure hope that helps somebody. You guys have a good one. Take care now. Bye.